Good morning and good afternoon to everyone joining us for today's seminar on the opportunities in assessment and student engagement when connecting with India and Australia. EduGrowth is delighted to be partnering with the Australia-India Institute to deliver the seminar with the support from the Australian Government Department of Education, Skills and Employment. I'm David Linke, Managing Director of EduGrowth, Australia's Education, Technology and Innovation Industry Hub. We were founded in 2016 by Charles Sturt, Deakin, Griffith, La Trobe, Monash Universities, along with private provider Navitas. These innovative education providers believed that Australia could be central to the digital transformation of education here and around the world. We thank them for their vision and support back those days and their ongoing work with us today, and all the many other partners that we've been able to work with over the last 5 years. Before we continue, allow me to pause and acknowledge traditional owners of Australia. As we gather today physically dispersed but virtually connected, I acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise their continuous and unbroken connection to the land, waters and culture across the country. Today I join you from the traditional land of the Bunurong, the Boiwurrung and the Woiwurrung people of Kulin Nations. I extend our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and specifically I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. And just a note for those joining us internationally, we do this acknowledgement of country to acknowledge the ongoing and unbroken connection between Australia's first people and the land which we call Australia, and we thank them for welcoming us to their country. We have a great program lined up today, hearing from experts in EdTech innovation across Australia and India. In a moment, I'll be joined by Aditya Gupta, the Managing Director of India Didactic Association, to set the scene on the Indian and Australian EdTech ecosystems. We'll then be followed by Cherie Diaz, the Managing Director of Australia for Open Learning, to moderate an in-conversation session on engaging students in virtual learning environments with Dina Wilcox, the Director of Student Employability at University of Queensland, and Raju Ganapath, the CEO of Concise. Our final session will then have Margot Griffith, the Head of Business Development at LX. We'll facilitate an in-conversation session with guest speakers Adam Bridgman, the Pro Vice Chancellor of Educational Innovation at the University of Sydney, and Nimish Chandri, the Vice President of International Business at WeBox, on the future of assessment in digital education world. But before, just a reminder, throughout the entire program, you can actually ask questions at any time in the Q&A section on Slido, the platform that you're on, and then I'll end up being transferred over to here on the live production stage. I'd now like to welcome representatives from the Australia-India Institute in the Department of Education and Training. First, let's welcome Karen Barker, who is the Executive Manager of the Australia-India Institute from the University of Melbourne. There she leads the delivery of government projects to support the Australian-India education relationship. Hi, Karen, how are you?
Hi, David. I'm really well. Thank you very much. We're so excited to be partnering with EduGrowth. EduGrowth is Australia's standout leader in the EdTech space, and the Australia-India Institute is Australia's premier centre dedicated to the study of India and the bilateral relationship. So this seems to be the perfect partnership for an Australia-India EdTech conversation. Like David, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I am speaking, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And I'd particularly like to note that it's NAIDOC Week in Australia, where we celebrate the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So really wish them a fantastic NAIDOC Week. Just a little bit about this seminar. It's actually the first of a series of seminars that the Australia-India Institute will deliver for the Department of Education, Skills and Employment. And we really thank the department for this opportunity to have these discussions. These seminars, they're built around India's Australia economic strategy and the education aspects of that strategy. And you might remember back in 2019, Peter Varghese produced a report for the Australian government on the India economic strategy for Australia. Well, last year, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa developed an Australia economic strategy for India, and it was published in December 2020. So one of the things that strategy highlighted was collaboration with Australia in relation to EdTech. EdTech was a key area of interest for India, especially in light of the impact of the pandemic on face-to-face teaching. So I think today is a really important discussion, and we're really excited by the lineup of speakers, and we're looking forward very much to the virtual conversation we're going to have this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Karen. And I think we've now got, let me have a quick clear. We've got Mel Southwell-Lee, the Director of South Asia International Division at the Department of Education, Skills and Employment within the Australian Government, to also add remarks. Hi, Mel, how are you?
Hi, David. I'm good, thank you. It's a long introduction for the departments always, so you got through that well. So thank you, David, for your introduction, and Karen as well, and for the opportunity to be part of this event. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm speaking to you from, which is the Ngunnawal people in Canberra. I would like to extend my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to anyone else, any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander persons who have joined us today. As Karen mentioned, it's NAIDOC Week, so it's a particularly important time to recognise the contributions and that continuing connection to land, sea and community that our First Nations people have. As Karen mentioned, this session is the first of several in relation to the educational opportunities highlighted in India's Australia Economic Strategy. And it's really great to start off with this one on EdTech. As we've all experienced, and the fact that we're having this session the way we are today, which might otherwise have been an in-person session, we have certainly seen that the pandemic has presented us with a number of challenges, but also opportunities to engage in learning in different ways. And those questions of how we learn in the future in Australia and India, and how we do that between our countries, is are very important, and I look forward to seeing those explored today. In June 2020, our respective Prime Ministers, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Morrison, in the context of the then newly agreed Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, they talked about the centrality that education, research and skills has to our relationship, our bilateral relationship. They really do underpin the progress and the growth trajectories of both of our nations. They also underscore hugely well-developed and hugely important people-to-people links between our nations. So we know that innovative education models and forms of delivery are really essential to the future of education in both Australia, India and around the world. As I said, it's clear that the pandemic has accelerated some of the changes in that space, but really they're often adopting or enhancing models that already existed to some extent in a number of our providers. That's also extended, of course, not just to educational delivery, but assessment models and student support and the whole range of services that students might otherwise be used to more readily accessing in an in-person format. Many Australian providers, because of this long history of many Australian providers being engaged in online delivery, it is one of the reasons why India's Australia Economic Strategy has highlighted this as an opportunity and a place where there is where it's right for engagement and strengthening in both of our systems. So some of you may be aware that the Australian government is currently undertaking an update of the Australian Strategy for International Education. There's been lots of consultations on that so far, and it's been a common theme throughout all those consultations that online, hybrid, creative, innovative, flexible models of learning, both in terms of the style of the course and the delivery of the course, will be central to really all aspects of education. So no matter what subject, what course level, what the kind of construct is, that this is going to be something we see happen more and more. Likewise, the Indian government in their transformative national education policy also highlighted the need to look at innovative new models of learning and how they can grow their capacity in that field. So this is a really fantastic space for us to engage in as part of this series of conversations. I think we'll hear from that the program has a really great lineup of speakers today. We'll get to lots of different perspectives on the issues, touching on lots of different aspects of what is not a monolithic piece. It does cover lots of different aspects of education, assessment, student support, and so forth. So I'd like to thank Karen and the Australia-India Institute for putting on this session today. They have a really excellent convening power and the ability to bring across people from both the Australian and the Indian education sectors, and a really broad sense of the sector as well. I'd like to thank our moderators. Thank you, David, and thank you to the guest speakers that will be presenting shortly. I really look forward to hearing what you have to add to this conversation. And finally, welcome to our audience. Good morning to those in India. Good afternoon to those in Australia. And I really hope you enjoy this session. Thank you.
Thanks so very much, Mel. It was a great introduction to remind us that, yes, we're going to have an interesting conversation about engagement and assessment, which are sort of at the core of online learning. So thanks for your support. We now get to sort of start thinking about the Australian-India EdTech ecosystem and how it interconnects with the education providers across the country. So with no further ado, let me welcome Aditya Gupta, the CEO of India's Didactic Association, the exclusive pan-Indian association in the country, dedicated to education and skills domain involving all stakeholders and unifying the entire sector. Aditya and I have worked together quite a lot over the last year, so welcome to this webinar, Aditya.
Thank you, David. And it's always a pleasure to be here with you. We've worked together in the last year or so, I think, and that's why I say that this year of COVID has brought a lot of collaborations, a lot of opportunities for working together between our countries. So great to be here. Thank you so much. Fantastic.
So maybe what we might do, Aditya, is why don't you give us a bit of an insight to the Indian EdTech ecosystem and the size of the market and things like that. And then I'll do the same about the Australian market. So I think you've got some slides, so let's get them up on screen. Here we go. So over to you to do a bit of an introduction.
Yep. Thank you, David. And like you said, I'll try and make sure that I'll stick to my 2 or 3 minutes and just give you very basic inputs in terms of what the market is, what the size is, and how EdTech has progressed over the years. This slide is just a very quick update on what India Didactic Association is. And as you can know, it's a National Association for Education and Skills. They're a not-for-profit organization working with governments, educators, educational institutions. We have a partnership with 19 countries. And as David said, we're very proud of our partnership with EduGrowth Australia. Current stats, and this is just to give a little bit of a perspective about India. The Indian education market is currently estimated at US $144 billion, and that this is give or take a little bit. We estimate it to be around 150, but the official figures are $144 billion, which is expected to grow to $225 billion in 2025. Some numbers, because India is a country of numbers, so we are at 1.65 million schools with over 400,000 in the private sector, 1,000 plus universities, which include the Autonomous and the Institute of Eminence, with 50,000 plus education institutes in the country. 25,000 vocational training centers enrolling 4.5 million students. And if you look at this ecosystem, we are probably larger than a lot of continents put together. In all, India has over 360 million learners, which basically makes it a land of opportunities for a lot of international providers who should look at India as a hub for education. I know that India and Australia are already working together with student mobility, with a lot of students moving to Australia every year. But I think this is also an opportunity for Australian institutes and Australian companies to look at learners within India. We have the world's largest population in the age bracket of 6 to 17. So we are a pretty young country, and that's, I think, a big demographic dividend which India enjoys as on today. 29% of our age group is under the age of 14, with 45% under the age of 25. We have a large English-speaking population, in fact, the second after the US. So that's again something as an advantage for working with the Indian market. When we look at the e-learning side, and now let's move a little bit to the tech and the online side of things. The second largest market for e-learning after the United States. Our online education market is expected to touch $8.6 billion by 2026. And I wouldn't be surprised if we cross that figure as well, because the way things have moved in the last 1 year, it's been a fantastic, rapid, steep incline in the adoption of these solutions. We have 624 million internet users, with 5% internet penetration in India. And these figures, of course, I'm talking about 6 months back. And again, these are growing and growing, but the COVID has always been a problem area, but I think it's the one silver lining which COVID has done is adoption of technology, with more and more people getting onto these platforms. Internet users have increased by 47 million, which is a 9%, almost 8-9% increase just in this last 1 year. Now, 15% active internet users in the age bracket of 5 to 11, which was completely unheard of earlier. You would never see early education and preschool toddlers and the early education students getting into or the primary students getting into the active internet user space, and that I think is a great opportunity coming in for companies. The EdTech users in India in the K-12 segment is estimated to be at 111 million. And if you see the kind of products and solutions which have worked really well so far, reskilling and online certifications is supposed to be the largest category with $93 million as the market size. Even the open online courses, the MOOCs as we call it, if you look at that and the adoption of that in India, we've got 60% of the world's entire student population in India using MOOCs. And I think that just shows the kind of adoption and the hunger which India has for such kind of solution. If you look at the Indian EdTech market, we're expected to touch US $30 billion by 2032. With 4,400 plus EdTech startups, now these are registered EdTech startups. And I will not be surprised if there are much more EdTech startups somewhere in the country, but these are the registered EdTech startups. Indian EdTech is globally ranked third, just behind US, with a funding of $2.3 billion in just 2020. I know US got $2.5 billion of funding and we got $2.3 billion. So that just shows how the market is evolving, and Indian EdTech is coming of age with the investors looking at India as a market. Over 90 EdTech players in 2020 received big funding, with approximately 62 companies getting 4th, 5th, and rounds of funding. The top tech players in the country include Byju's, Unacademy, Vedantu, Topper, and others. Where has the investments happened? So if you look at, and this is what I think what David had asked me to do, was give the top 5 segments where the investments had happened in the country for EdTech. It would be K-12 and test preparation, continued and lifelong, higher education technologies, pre-K-12, and B2B EdTech. Now, these are some of the things which we see are important going forward. I'd like to close my slides with this and then answer any of the questions which David has for me.
Thanks very much, Aditya. It's given us a great grounding and insight to the size of the market. And actually, as I was sitting there watching that, I thought I should have gone first, actually, because now the numbers are going to sound like we're just a tiny little village of India when we start talking about Australia. So give me a moment and I'll do the same thing, scene setting, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the mega trends. So in simple terms, just for counterpoint for people, there are 600 Australian EdTech companies. They employ 13,000 people. They're spread across the core markets in Australia. Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane are the 3 core markets in that order of magnitude as well. Those 600 Australian EdTech companies generate $2.2 billion, and they're exporting about $600 to $700 million of that is export. If you have got more than $3 million worth of revenue in Australia, you are an exporter. You are exporting. 100% of companies above that number are exporting. So some of them are exporting up to 37% of their income is coming offshore. Just to give a bit of context, because I took some notes from Aditya, right? 1.6 million schools in India. There are 9,500 in Australia. 60% of those schools are government, 20% of them are Catholic schools, and 20% of them are independent schools. But all of them receive some government funding. Every single school in Australia receives some government funding. We have large urban and regional schools, and then there are tiny, small rural schools. So there are schools with 1 or 2 teachers. There's 1,000 of them that have got very small numbers. As far as our university sector, there are 40 Australian universities. Actually, I think there's 41 now. I think last Monday or the Monday before, there was a new university in Australia announced. So welcome, Avondale University. Large student bodies. We have the typical university in Australia is 40 to 50,000 to 60,000 students. So the smallest might be, well, Avondale, it's probably 5,000, I think, but typically it's about 20 or 30,000 up to about 100,000 students. 38 of those universities are publicly funded, 2 of them are private institutions. As far as our TAFEs and RTOs are concerned, which is the vocational training sector in Australia, there are 59 public TAFEs, which are large public vocational training institutions typically owned by state governments. there are 4,000 RTOs, and these are typically providing skills-based retraining type facilities and programs to institutions. So that sets a little bit of a mega trend. Okay, so to go back, 1.6 million schools in India, about 10,000 in Australia. There's approximately 4,000 vet providers in Australia, 25,000 in India. 51,000 higher education providers in India, and there's 40 in Australia. And I think you had your market growing to 225 billion. I don't know what the EdTech market in Australia will grow to by 2025, but we know that EdTech spend alone in Australia is 2.2 billion. So the markets are slightly different, but we have a great story here. Why don't I begin by asking you a broad question, Aditya, which is, what do you think are the top mega trends happening in education in India today?
Right, David. I would have to say that the numbers that you just said are not the concern. The idea is, I think Australia has always been at the top of the education game and has been known and renowned as a country with fantastic education systems. So I think there's a lot of collaboration which is possible between the two countries in this space. But coming to the trends in education, and I would have to pick up from what Karen had mentioned, and I think Karen and Mel had mentioned this. What are the trends coming in? COVID, like I said, has been a big game changer for us. It's been an issue, of course, around the world. People have suffered with pandemic, but if I have to find a silver lining, I think it would have to be within the education space and within the adoption of technology space. A decade worth of technology was adopted in the education system in COVID. And even the mindset change, which was always a problem area in India as far as transformation of education is concerned. There is now a definitive focus on personalized content, collaborative learning, education anytime, anywhere. We're talking about developing critical thinking skills for the students. Students are now being used to game-based learning. We are talking about using MOOCs and online distance learning programs. Schools and colleges are more and more often than not using platforms to assess students. I mean, that's a challenge area. We need good proctoring assessment solutions, but that's also an opportunity which schools and colleges are getting into. We're using a lot more platforms for assessing the gaps in students. There's a lot more platforms which are being used to connect with students. And now more and more, as we see hybrid education becoming the new normal, so to speak, these solutions will become even more adopted, will be adopted even more. When we look at from the EdTech scenario side and the companies which have got the visual appeal and people have been noticing them and what's happening in the funding space, the biggest gainer in this space is tutoring and test preparation. I mean, you're talking about almost $550 million and more, which is the online on-demand learning, coaching, and which includes the vernacular language teaching. And that's been a big, big plus for the market. There's a big plus for STEM learning, which includes coding and mathematics and these kind of subjects which have come on the B2C platform. Then there is the digitization and education issues, like I said, complete automation, ERP, LMS, exam proctoring solutions. I think those are the trends that we see are coming in and opportunities for the companies. Use of immersive tools like AR, VR, skill-oriented programs, fintech in education. And these are some of the trends which you see are the ones which will take the EdTech industry forward.
I think in Australia some of those trends are happening too, Aditya. So we're seeing similar sorts of things. I would probably pick three things if I was talking to Indian institutions or Indian EdTech companies about what I think is happening in Australia. And I think it comes down to three components. One is micro-credentials. Like, yeah. I think smaller training packages that are connected to industry and supported by industry certainly are part of the narrative across all education systems, focusing which leads to the next one, which is really around how do you bridge between formal education and the workforce. So there is absolutely no doubt that there is a desire and a need to do that bridge. So the micro-credential connected to industry packages which are, support employment is definitely the thing that institutions in Australia are seeking really highly, which leads to the final thing, which in my view is one of the mega trends. They're connected together, and that is student engagement, but for the entire student. So using the data and the experiences that you can gather in a digital world to be able to ensure that you engage them, which is really important in today's conversation when we're talking about engagement and assessment. Question for you, Aditya, around assessment. What are you actually seeing institutions wanting to do with their assessment programs and platforms in India?
Sorry, I think I got a little bit of a lag there, David. Could you just repeat that question for me, please?
Yeah, so what are the things that you're seeing Indian institutions, education providers, are seeking from an assessment perspective?
Security and proctoring from an assessment perspective.
Okay. Yes, you've just highlighted for me, I forgot. I should have put security and data privacy and data sovereignty on the top of my list as well, but that'll be my fourth one, all right? So we'll put that one there too.
Well, as far as Indian education systems are concerned, institutions are concerned, we are not very different from where you are. I think micro-credentials, linking the programs with employability, industry orientation, applied learning, these are becoming important. As you mentioned, student engagement is extremely important. Any solution, any EdTech platforms which can create fantastic student engagements with privacy, with data analysis, with identification of gaps, coming out with solutions, that's the need of the hour. The one area which I think India has an extra need is teacher training. Because all of these technologies, all of these solutions are fantastic. And I think the needs are pretty similar around the world. But one area where Indian educators definitely need support is teacher training. And that's where the reskilling factor, the certification factor comes in as well. Because India was, there was a mindset against technology and there was a very slow movement towards technology. But suddenly last year when everybody had to take on technology, they moved, but the skill set, the knowledge set of moving to the online tech platform wasn't there. So I think that was something which I would add as well.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. I think I don't know who it is. I'll go with Winston Churchill. I think it's his saying that, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And there's no doubt that the pandemic has highlighted a couple of opportunities. One is it's highlighted the gap, maybe the digital gap between institutions that were already on a transformation journey and those that weren't. I think there's that possibility, but also the other thing is it's given, I think, institutions and government regulators an opportunity to drive a little bit of change and to accelerate that change. So I think that's true in Australia as well. I'm sure that's probably a global trend, to be honest, that's come out of the pandemic. Maybe the final thing that we'll talk about is, where do you see the opportunity for collaboration between India and Australia from an education and an EdTech provider?
Well, I do see definitely a lot of opportunities going between the two countries. Like I said, Australia is rated very highly in terms of education systems and standards. The one area which I see definitely going forward, like I mentioned, is teacher training and skill development. That's something which Indian institutes would be looking forward from Australia's side. Security-enabled tech solutions, student engagement solutions, management support with complete monitoring and gap. What other thing we could look at is content and research. I mean, I know that Indian institutes always look forward to Australian content, whether at the K-12 level or the higher ed level, and also in terms of research support. I think those are some of the things we could look at coming from Australia to India. What can go from India to Australia, beside the students which we send always, is India's ability to innovate. India's EdTech ecosystem is very solid, and the innovations are good. And we have cities like Bangalore, which is known as Silicon Valley of Asia. So if we look at the innovative solutions which India brings out and the cost effectiveness associated with it, I think those are some of the things we can look at. So there are solutions which are Indian made but ready for the international market, and that's something we can export to Australia. The other is where some of your development aspect of it or the back-end aspect of it could be given to India. And I think that could open up a lot of collaborative opportunity between the two countries.
I think that's a good point for us to finish on, actually, Aditya. And let me make the following comment. I think that it's really important for Australian education institutions that are in this call today, and especially some of our colleagues from DESI as well, is to think about the role that when you start moving into emerging markets like India, the challenge for Australian education providers and EdTech companies is the price point, and they're very different. So there's a real opportunity to collaborate with Indian suppliers who have got technology that's fit for purpose for the market, but with the robustness of the Australian education process and certainly the AQF to be able to provide and support learners in that market, which is a nice way for me to segue to our final point before we hand over to somebody else. And that is three things that I want to sort of leave people with about what I think they need to understand about the Australian EdTech ecosystem, the Australian education space. Firstly, it's a growing market. It's growing really rapidly. It doubled in the last 4 or 5 years. It's focused, the Australian EdTech ecosystem is focused on supporting learners within existing institutions. So we're a B2B market, we're not a B2C space. We're not about replacing education institutions, about supporting them. And finally, the EdTech companies have the capacity to help you with the digital transformation. So they can help in that digital transformation because they have well-developed and embedded learning design and pedagogical design within it. Did you want to sort of finish with any key points as well, Aditya?
Well, I guess from the same space, David, and at this time, I'll take a cue from you. The fact that Indian education as a market is a fantastic mix between B2B and B2C, and B2C has just come off it with supplementary learning and tutoring. But the providers and all the partners who want to work with India have to understand that India is not one country, it's a continent, and it's a continent with diverse needs and diverse views. So if you're looking at working within the Indian space, understand that there's a multiple layers of B2B space and there is a B2C market. Yes, it's a price-sensitive market. I would not say price-conscious, but it's a price-sensitive market where value for money works. But very important is the fact that we are always open to new solutions. So any solutions which brings together education, technology, and employability for a student, it works very well in India.
Aditya, on that point, thank you so very much for giving us your insights today and to working with us on this webinar with the Australian India Institute and the Department of Education, Skills and Employment. Thank you. Thank
you so much, David. Always a pleasure. Take care.
Which is a nice segue where we get into some real meat now. We start thinking about, I think it's first up is engagement, I'm pretty sure. And we've got Cherie Diaz, who is the Managing Director of Australia for Open Learning Global. Cherie leverages her experience as an educator, organisational development advocate and operational executive to partner with users of the Open Learning platform around the world. Hi Cherie, how are you?
Hi David, good, thank you. Yourself?
I'm doing very well. I'll hand over to you to lead our interesting conversation.
Awesome, thank you. Hi everyone, thanks for making the time to join us today. I'm going to introduce two important people that will be part of today's conversation. And first of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Dino Willocks, who is the Director of Student Employability at the University of Queensland. Dino's work spans professional, academic and extracurricular spaces, taking a multidimensional strategic approach to embedding employability across the University of Queensland. Dino is the chair of the Employability Group and member of Student Experience and Global Mobility Groups for Under 21, a global network of research-intensive universities. Dino, I think it's fair to say you keep yourself fairly busy.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us. Rather than me put in my words what you do from a day-to-day perspective, do you want to maybe introduce yourself and some of the cool stuff that you're working on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I work across the University of Queensland working with academics, professional staff and students to really kind of create a wealth of different enrichment opportunities for students to get involved in, both within the classroom, but also in the co-curricular and extracurricular space. The focus at UQ is really on experiential learning, and that can be in any aspect of your life. Really what we're trying to do is make sure that we offer as many different opportunities to as many different students as possible to engage in as many different places and spaces, so in the virtual as well as the physical, so that they can actually reflect on those experiences and learn from them and really translate that into value. So value for themselves, for any organisation they work with, or value in their own institutions or their own organisations if they want to actually become founders. So a whole range of different ways of doing that with a whole range of different people in a whole range of different places and spaces. It's fun.
Awesome, thank you. And lots of points to come back to. I'd also like to introduce Raju Ganapathy, who is the CEO of Conscience, an education technology company. They partner with the world's leading education and professional publishers, K-12 schools, colleges, universities, associations, test preparation companies, and training companies that teach and assess as a distinctly measurable student outcome. Raju, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to ask you the same question, or ask you to also give an overview of what you do in a day-to-day perspective as well, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cherie. I think it's my pleasure to join this meeting. Just to add to what you just mentioned of my first level description, I think I'm front and center wherever I have the opportunity to really participate on structural and instructional design methodologies that we undertake in kind of creating these compelling learning experiences. So if we're talking about student experiences in a digital world, and more so now in a hybrid world where you have touch points between a high touch classroom environment to a less touch or a no touch experience, which is completely self-paced and on demand, how are we really focusing on better learning experiences? How do we create sufficient learning hooks? How do we get students coming back for more? Because there is so much out there. I think I was listening to the last 5 minutes of the earlier session that I think Mr. Aditya Gupta was talking about. And I kind of allude to a lot of those points. There are so many EdTech companies in India and globally, and everybody has a solution. But which one is better than the other, or which one is more suitable and more appropriate? I focus squarely on the design principles that underpin the structural sides of these learning dissemination processes, as well as obviously the pedagogical, which is either andragogy or pedagogy, of course, in the K-12 and higher ed space. So that's me at a high level. Again, I'm the CEO of Conscience, which is an Indian EdTech company, but we're servicing largely the global markets, the US, the UK, Australia. And of course, all of these companies that we work with have found themselves an audience in India as well. So by that virtue, we're pretty much working across continents in delivering services.
Awesome, thank you. This is a conversation about student engagement, and one of the interesting points I always find is to actually ask, or what's your definition of student engagement, or what does that look like for you? Dina, I might put you on the spot and ask for what are the things that you look for?
I think one of the things that I always think about is there's always a difference between engagement and interaction. You can engage people by getting them logged on, like we've got 54 people watching us today, but are they really interacting? And so one of the questions for me is, how do we make people interact, especially in the virtual space? It's very easy to get people in the physical space to interact and get involved, but engagement and interaction are two different things. And really what you need is data from the systems that you're using to be able to say, well, are they just logged on? Are they engaging? Are they talking to us? Have we got polls going? How do we make this an interactive space so it's not just a passive reception of information? It's really engaging people in that almost in a kinesthetic way, getting them to actually interact with the technology. And I think Raghu can actually speak to how some of the design of EdTech can make that happen and cause that to happen. And I think there's some really interesting ways that new EdTech is causing that to happen in ways that are actually better than in the physical space. So being able to have people working on a virtual whiteboard where they're actually engaging in ways where they probably wouldn't in person, but they can through the technology. So I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to some of those really innovative technology spaces that are better than the pherrical space.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. Raju, over to you. How do you define student engagement?
Absolutely. Sherry, I think I would only add to everything that Dino has just talked about on this opening note, which is when we're looking at the design process, which is again where I squarely participate, I would break this down into two parts. One is the structural design, and the other is the content design, because you need for structure to meet with content, especially when you're creating the digital experience. Now, more often than not, or in almost every scenario, you need a platform, which more likely is a learning management system, or it could be something else. But for the most part, it's basically a learning management system, which houses the content delivery experience. So whatever it is you take from an instructional design perspective, whatever methodologies you apply scientifically, we heard about micro-credentialing, we talk about, basically the learner journey that you conceive as a course designer, as a course developer, as faculty. You need to make sure that the two aspects of the platform, which is what I call the structural design, mates with the instructional design that you come up with in your learner journey. And of course, through that process, you have so many touch points. Yes, I also oftentimes say that good quality learning is not and should not be a sit back and watch passive experience, like looking at video headshots preceded by or followed by multiple choice questions. That's not a great learning experience. Yes, you may hit check boxes here and there, but is that really going to increase the efficacy? Is that going to retain your students and their knowledge and their interest? More often than not, we've seen disappointing statistics in those areas. So that's the starting. I mean, we focus on looking at structural design. We're looking at how the platforms are conceived. And I think, Sherry, the real starting point is, and this is a problem, this is a 30,000 feet above the ground. I say that as a problem statement mindfully, but really if you look at any good tech product that's there in the ed space, you really need to look under the hood and see that first thing first, which is, have we got the instructional designers or the people that come from the teaching and pedagogical background to really get on the same table, to get on the same page with people who've gone ahead and built the platform. So it's getting the software developers and the learning designers on the same page to conceive your product from step one to step last. The ones who've done it well are the ones who are really reaping the rewards, and we're just kind of getting started. So,
and I think just to pick up on that as well, one of the things that Aditya talked about in the previous presentation was actually about game-based learning as well. And one of the things there is it's really thinking about how to use the structure of that technology to engage people and have them interact with each other, and actually then link that to the content and link that to the learning that's happening. So the structure of the EdTech causes the learning to happen by virtue of that framework and that the architecture in behind it. So you have to have the architecture and the content working symbiotically to actually create something that's new, that's actually more than what you would get if you were in a traditional learning environment. And that's what I'm more excited about really in this space, because you are getting new ways of connecting those things together. And I think the other thing that's really important in that is you have to valorize the ability to create that as much as create the content. So to create the structure and the framing and the technology that goes with that is equally as important as the content if you really want this to become a truly exceptional educational process.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one. And if I, draw upon a particular experience for open learning, one of the key things that we stand behind is that our learning platform was designed and is founded in a learning science, which is social constructivism. So the entire platform is designed with that in mind, and our learning design approach is carried throughout. But one of the points of conversations with the almost 180 education partners that we partner with is often, how do they get started, or how do they optimize what the platform enables them to do? And that's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So it's not just, who's the target audience and the delivery mode and that sort of piece, but it's also the consideration when you've worked in a particular learning management system or platform. Quite often there's a risk when you change platforms or you test out new platforms that you take the exact same content and use the platform in the same way you've used a previous one. So how do you, vary that? And if I talk about a particular use case for one of our partners, which is iResolves, and they deliver ethics and social justice programs, primarily dedicated to 12 schools, not just in Australia, but globally as well. And they already had astounding NPS ratings for their face-to-face delivery. But one of the pieces for them is they had highly engaging face-to-face workshops. So how do you redesign that in an online environment? And what's been quite cool is that actually the concern of losing out that interaction and that interactivity, some of their programs are not only more scalable and repeatable now, but in many instances, they're getting NPS scores of 90 to 100 for those programs. So with that in mind, I might hand over and ask, with your programs that you run, how did you make that shift to an online environment over the last 18 months? What were your consideration points?
Well, the first consideration point, honestly, was get it done quickly. So we transitioned all of our learning to online within a week. So that speed of activity really doesn't necessarily give you the opportunity to think through how could you make this that thing that I was talking about, that symbiotic relationship between the technology and the content, to make it really exciting. But what we have done at the University of Queensland is take a students as partners approach. So everything that we've done, we've actually worked with our students to say, okay, what works with you and for you, and how can we actually develop this and co-create something going forward? So the initial switch was just quick, and it was a lot of that just lift and drop into an LMS that was there, so that we could actually maintain the learning happening. But really what we then did is said, okay, we know that's not ideal, and we know that we need to do better, so let's actually do it with students. So that we're working with students, with EdTech companies, with third-party providers as well, to say, well, what kind of products are there in the market that we can use, and there's a whole wealth of different products that are working, which can be great from the student perspective and from the learner's perspective because it's very agile. Universities are not necessarily very agile places, so you've always got the issues in the background of connecting the data and connecting the systems and making sure that we're getting from all of those different systems data that actually helps us continue to develop and grow and co-create those learning environments with students. But I think that really has been a fundamental priority for the university, is not assume that we know, neither assume that the student necessarily knows, neither assume that the EdTech company knows, but actually work cooperatively together to create something more. Because again, I think it's one of the things that has been very, very challenging for academics, I would say, is all of a sudden they're not the experts. They're one expert within an environment or within an ecosystem where we have other experts. So we have EdTech people and EdTech companies who can say, we're actually the experts in this design space. And we've got students going, well, you know, we might be experts in how to use some of this technology because we've grown up with it and we're digital natives. And maybe some of our academics haven't got the same experience, the same life skills. So really recognizing that everyone brings to that environment something unique and something valuable. And it's the combination and the kind of collision of all of those things that creates something really new. So being open to that possibility and that co-creation, I think, was really essential in pushing things forward. And that's just my experience anyhow, Yuki, and I'm sure with 52,000 students and 6 faculties that there'll be other experiences out there, but that's certainly been my experience.
Awesome. I'm going to throw out to both of you now a question that's come up in the chat is, how do you take into consideration in that design process student access to devices and connectivity in terms of being able to provide reliability in that learning experience?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because there's also, we have a lot of our students do work integrated learning in rural and remote areas where the connectivity to the internet is not necessarily great. So making sure that what you're providing is something that can be accessed online. So either through at the moment I'm at home and I'm working off a dongle, seems to be working okay, but making sure that people have access to that. But also we have at the University of Queensland, we have laptop loan options, so students can get access to laptops if they don't have their own, things like that. But you really do have to think about what do people need and what's the kind of minimum viable product that we can produce that is accessible to as many different people as possible. We're not just looking at people on campus, we're looking at people at home, we're looking at people in rural and remote, we were looking at people offshore who are also still connecting, and we've got a lot of students even now who are still studying in country offshore. So we've got to make sure that we've considered not only the tech but the bandwidth potential and also time zones. So there's a whole bunch of things we need to think about. And do you provide things live as well as to watch afterwards, as well as hybrid? Yeah, it's trying to balance that is always difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Raju?
Sure, Sherry. I couldn't agree more with what Dino just mentioned. If I may just draw in the angle of the design aspect of access to devices, I think, again, when we go through a design process of how do you deliver this training and how do you kind of redesign this training for the new tech stack that's available, I think we also look at it from the perspective of which content lends itself best to what type of environment when students actually have to engage with it. So if you go through a learner journey as an example, where you start with, let's say, some amount of teaching content, you have a lot of material to read with pictures, images, visuals, etc., and then you start introducing media probably as a way of reinforcement. Do you reinforce the learning that you've just given in the last 15 minutes? Some of those pieces can actually be given away for a mobile-first environment as against a desktop environment. And it's not a sit back and watch, a read experience even of a printed textbook or a didactic learning experience. This is something that learners can then very quickly. So, we've been trying this for nearly, much before the pandemic, really for the last 15 years or so. But you can very well see students actually taking some type of formative assessments, even on their mobile phones when they're in the underground train in New York or London or any other place. And you can apply the same even with offline access to content. You could do that in other developing countries where the network and connectivity is not that high as well. So which content lends itself where best in the entire learner journey is one that also needs to be paid attention to when you start at the outset. Just to add to the network and connectivity part that Dino just talked about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it reinforces Dino's point earlier about working collectively through that design process rather than feeling that you have to get it to a certain point before handing it over or being ready to go live. Actually, it can be an iterative process working with a particular partner and students, etc. And then how do you use that data for each iteration to improve or feed through for further intakes or cohorts of learners that are going through the process as well?
And I think that, just to pick up on that, Charlie, that idea of it being an iterative process, learning itself is an iterative process. And so I think we've kind of, almost through this pandemic, we've become more honest about the fact that we're trying things, we're trying different things, and maybe they don't quite work, but okay, let's work together and find a better way of doing that. And I think within that, there's a recognition that what we create within an educational environment is a place or a space where really people should be trying things out and being safe to fail and having that kind of early failures and going, okay, we'll learn from that and we can do better. And even within EdTech and within the entrepreneurial space, it's part of the course that you try something and it fails and you learn from it and you move on. And almost in education, there's this idea that you can't, as a university or as an academic, you can't be seen to fail. And really, we need to get comfortable with that and say, this is actually part of innovation. This is part of creativity. This is just actually what happens. And we have to recognize that sometimes we don't quite get it right. And so we'll learn from that and we'll make it better next time. So that iterative process really needs to be front and center, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the challenges, even myself having come from a teaching background is that sense of I have to have all of the answers and I have to be able to do it all myself. There's the concern or risk in being in an online environment that often comes up is that sense of isolation or that you lose that human connection, whereas actually there's the positives that come out of it in that human connection of being able to say, this is an iterative process. And then the other side is how do you build that community of practice and community of learning so that it isn't you as an academic or a teacher or a facilitator having to be the sage on the stage the entire way through as well, which I guess leads me to the question that's come up, and it's one that often I get asked as well on not a daily basis, but pretty much every week is, how do you support or guide academics or teaching staff through that change process? And Raju, I'm going to hand over to you on this one because you have a wealth of experience, not just during the pandemic, but well before that. So what's your guidance or advice?
Sure, I'm going to take a lead from the sage on the stage example that you just cited here, Sherry. I think really we're kind of delving deeper into points we've already opened up in the last 5 minutes, talking through things. The first thing I think is, again, this, if you look at the higher education system globally, Australia, India, US, anywhere, we're talking about hundreds of years of institutional practice to get it to where we are today. 5 years. We're looking at brick and mortar. We're looking at physical campuses being built. We're looking at getting students inside the classroom. We're looking at putting the facilitator or the faculty in the center of the class, and then going about the process of conducting, teaching, learning, and dissemination. What has happened over 300 years in that format is now being quickly questioned, challenged, and I say that respectfully and mindfully here, but that's what we're dealing with in just about now with the new millennials and the new students. It's not about just what do I want to learn, it's also about who can I learn from, which is also a choice now in the hands of the learners. So obviously, when you have these rather evolutionary changes happening under the feet, we really need to look at a redesign process, which alludes to the fact that when content was originally created in the traditional format, which is the high-touch classroom environment that we all know, the content was really created with the perspective of actually making it more teacher-facing, faculty-facing, than directly student-facing. It's a facilitation process where faculty takes that PowerPoint slide from the overhead projector and uses his or her skills, soft skills, to kind of teach, control the students, and have that interaction in a one-on-one, completely 100% high-touch environment. With a lockdown and a pandemic, unfortunately, the world needed a pandemic for that to kind of talk about the change of scenario, but that has all changed right now. We are the position in the triangle, as I like to call it. You have the student, you have the learner, and you have the content. And the position of these three pivotal points has rapidly changed in just about a few years, and more so in the last 18 months. So to answer your question, I think once again, I would say it's about an overhaul of the content design process such that you make that content not teacher facing, but directly student facing. And it's easier said than done. That's a huge transformational process. And for the ones who understood it, have done it well, have really started to see the rewards already in so many years, and we've seen some of that very closely. So, and you talked about this again. That's where I oftentimes say that the what of the teaching, if you ask me, is the prerogative of the subject matter expert, because he or she knows what it is they're teaching, they're talking about in any subject area. But the how-to of that teaching is where you can get the handy help of seasoned good quality instructional designers, because they do not understand the content, the subject matter, but they definitely can help with how you can take this, to the last mile in terms of the design process, in terms of the distribution process. So that is the first phase. So it is about really taking that content and making it from a didactic teacher-facing experience to making it more directly student-facing. And in that, you can bring in all those things like, just a few minutes ago, Dino talked about creating scenario-based experiences where it's perfectly fine to fail in. That is what you need. You want students to go through a process where it's not always a one way of getting enlightened at the end of it. You have to make mistakes. You have to fail before you come back on the right path. So using media, using interactive videos, again, in a video experience like this, it should be an environment where if it's a role play, if it's a dialogue, if it's a scenario-based learning experience, you could create that using animations, graphics, illustrations, or you can even put up a headshot of a key opinion leader for a 5-minute video. But you do not have to run that video for 5 minutes and students are then going off to their WhatsApp messaging. You can actually intervene the 5-minute video with cue points where you're actually allowing learners to participate. I'll just give that as one example, but that's a classic interactive video experience in a good quality course. So it's about bringing in those touch points. So on the other extreme, you can create simulations, a physics, biology lab simulation. Let's take a gram stain. It's a 37-step process of how you do a stain and how you find the results. And students have to do that. And that's that's an extreme form of creating simulations with rich media interactions. But even a basic one could be taking a 5-minute video headshot of a faculty, a key opinion leader, but not letting it play on its own, but getting those interactions, allowing for objections, and probably even looking at remediation pathways. So you're actually taking them into different parts and kind of gating them out. So I'm going in a different direction, and another student is going in a different direction from a key intersection gateway point.
Yeah, great.
Those are some of my thoughts, Sherry.
Dino, do you have any guidance or tips as to how you approached it?
I agree with everything that Raju said, and I think the thing is it's the what and the how, and I think in bringing those two things together, the critical thing for me is have students involved in those conversations as well, because that really gives you the why. Why are you doing this? So there's an element there about why do the students want to know this, and how can we make it better for them? But is it working? And get that feedback. So getting real-time feedback, and that comes back to the data again, and that very first question about the engagement and interaction. Getting that from the students and making sure that that's feeding all the time the co-creation and the continued development of that learning environment, because that's how you're going to make it work.
Definitely. And I think the piece that ties that all together is that how does this all align to the learning outcomes that we started out with the intention of delivering and being able to demonstrate against as well. And I think reflection and building in reflection opportunities, not just for the learners, but for the learning design staff and the academic staff, is a key part of that process. I could keep talking for hours, but we're running out of time very quickly. So if I can ask, Dino, do you have 2 or 3 key takeaways from a student engagement perspective to leave everyone with today?
Yeah, I think that the virtual and the physical spaces and places for learning provide different opportunities, but they actually need to be connected to have maximum effect. So you can't just be virtual or just be physical. You're going to have to somehow bring those together, and thinking about collaboration and creating synergies between all of the people involved in that. The human connection is fundamentally important, and that human connection can be facilitated in a virtual environment. But ultimately, we need to make sure that connection is two-way, that we're listening as well as speaking, and that we're actually designing things that engage people and get them to interact. It's not just a didactic one-way thing. I did get asked before we started this, what would your one takeaway be? And I want to leave you with a quote. I studied philosophy originally. The only constant in life is change. That's from Heraclitus, born in 540 BCE. So we're still in that place now. Everything is changing still, and we need to embrace that change and enjoy it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your contribution and your time today. Raju, what would be your takeaways?
Sure, Sherry. I think, again, I would allude to the fact that everything that we do here in terms of design and experience also has to be one that's actionable and data-driven, which I think was a point that you kind of led into in the first part. So that is a very important piece, actionable insights, getting actionable insights from anything that you do, especially in an iterative process. You have version 1 and then you end up with a version 5 over a period of time. We need to be able to get the right type of actionable insights, and we need to design that effectively for all stakeholders in the system. So if it's a learner, I mean, as a student, and these are some of the things that coincidentally we're working on very closely at this moment, even in the form of a product. But as a student, what do I need to see? I need to see how am I doing? What is my progress in a course? If I have a 12-week course or a 20-week course, how far along have I gone? What activities have I taken? What is still in progress? What is completed? What are the mandatory activities? I need to be able to get all of this data. If you talk about student engagement, they need to be, again, hooked to their experience, whether it's physical or whether it's digital. So looking at some of these parameters like my progress in the course, my pace, I would say the pace is the equivalent of your heart rate when you step up on a treadmill. If I have 300 students in my peer group, how am I doing up against the others? So the pace indicator is a vital indicator. And of course, finally, the performance, which again is looking at formative, summative, and really how have I done in this course? How do I look at my assessments? How have I scored? And how do I go to my remediation? All of this vested with a good interaction with a student success manager or a director of student success. If you have that through a learner journey, will call for a nice, compelling experience. I can see that people are looking at the watch, and
I think David's popped back up, so that's the final wrap up.
Visual cue.
When David turns out, that's where we have to go.
As soon as I start hearing researchers and academics quoting the philosopher who created it, is saying that we use every single day from 1545 BC. Is that right? Did I get the date right?
540 BCE. 540 BCE.
530. There we go. Then I realise it's time for me to come back to bring the conversation back to EduGrowth normal. So thank you, Raju. Thank you, Dina, and thank you, Cherie, for an amazing conversation about engaging students in the digital world. Thank you very much.
Pleasure as always. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Which gives us an opportunity now to welcome Margot Griffith to the stage, who is from EduLex. Margot leads growth at EduLex, which is EduLex is an Australian EdTech platform that is doing amazing things around micro-credentialing and supporting learners and showing the evidence of that work. But Margot's been in the higher education space for a very long time. We won't put numbers on things, Margot. We'll just say that you are well known to our audience and you have got a long career here. So I'll hand over the stage to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Yeah, very excited to be here, and I appreciate you not dating me with the number of years I've been in the education market here in Australia. So yes, super excited to be here to talk about assessment and opportunities in assessment, but also innovative assessment models. And I'm going to be joined by two wonderful people, the first of which is Professor Adam Bridgman. Welcome, Adam. So Adam is, or has, according to my piece of paper here, decades of experience as well as an educator, and is also has been the Pro Vice Chancellor for Educational Innovation in the Education Portfolio since 2018 at the University of Sydney. With a focus on using electronic resources in chemical education, Adam has specialised in the effectiveness of electronic resources for enhancing education, including the use of simulations, calculators and games on the web and on mobile phones. Adam holds a PhD in inorganic chemistry from Trinity Hall in Cambridge. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Margot.
And I will introduce our other colleague here, Nimish Chowdhury. Nimish is the current Vice President of International Business at WeBox, an IT company that offers technical assistance to aid seamless pedagogy. WeBox provides proctored AI proctored, AI-driven, safe, secure, and scalable assessment, and also LMS solutions. Nimish received an MIM of Management at Charles Darwin University and also has a Master of Arts from Chowdhury Charan Singh University. So welcome, Nimish. Thank you both for joining today.
Thank you, Thank you.
I would like to, we've only got 30 minutes today, so I guess we'll jump right in. If I can throw to you, Adam, please. We are, as I mentioned, talking about innovation and innovative models in assessment. Hoping you can share with us, I guess, the pandemic and also post-pandemic plans for assessment at the University of Sydney for your 70,000 students.
Thanks, Margot. Yeah, 70,000 students, about 4,000, 5,000 staff who are research focused. We've been thinking about changing assessment for years. Suddenly last April, everything went online. So obviously we started having to really rethink our assessment very quickly and getting through last year. And we're now planning for what is going to be next year and what's going to be the new normal, which is definitely going to be much more online than we ever would have planned, but making the best of online and face-to-face. So that's the challenge. I've spent the last 14 months trying to get online assessment to actually work at scale. And now we're thinking about what that's going to look like in the future.
Yeah, there's some huge challenges there. Nimish, wonder if you'd be able to share with us around, I guess, the education environment within India. We know the COVID from afar, but what did that mean for education in particular? What did it mean for assessment in India?
See, Margot, there were abundant challenges which were there in terms of how do we assess people, especially with about 1.35 billion people. And in universities, as Adam said, there are about 70,000 students. In our universities, we close to have about 100,000 students which actually appear for assessments. And managing that kind of a crowd and managing that kind of a scalability which was there was kind of missing. And that is one of the biggest challenges the entire economy faced, the entire education fraternity faced. And I think since we've been operational for the last 11 years in India, we had some large ideas as to how to plug in and fit in the model where we can offer an AI-driven, remote proctored, customizable assessment solutions. And I think we kind of seeped into that change which was forced upon us. And as somebody said, the change is inevitable. That's the only thing which is actually constant and permanent. And with our 11 years of experience, we realized that this is the time probably where we'll have to innovate more, because by the time we were sitting in 2018-19, we thought that we had invented and reinvented the wheel. But by the time we came to mid-2020, we realized there are a whole bunch of new requirements which are suddenly mushroomed up, and we didn't know how to address them. And probably today, sitting in 2021, we as VBox believe that we'll take another 3 to 4 years to innovate more to address what are the requirements in terms of the industry's expectations, maybe be it the education fraternity or the corporate fraternity.
Yeah, it's there are many challenges, and I'm understating that completely around the move to online assessment. Adam, would you care to outline some of those challenges I'm sure you're facing as we speak?
So those challenges, I think, are partly in the way that we have assessed. We've tended to assess knowledge, and assessing knowledge is just unsuitable for somebody that's got access from home to the web. But that's telling us something. That's telling us that assessment was probably pretty not fit for the modern world anyway, because the Google search engines are just there and available. And so why would we restrict our students from them? Doing this on scale is a massive problem, and ensuring integrity is a really big problem. And so when we're rethinking assessment for the modern world, it has to be assessment for learning, to make sure that we're assessing the things that we want that are valuable to students and valuable to their employers in the future, and valuable to us for giving them rich feedback, not simply yes, this is correct or incorrect. It's those skills that they'll need, that students will need, that we need to assess. And doing that online is obviously a huge challenge, and some things you probably don't want to do that way, because You don't want your surgeons necessarily to be assessed in a VR model for forever. You want them to actually have done that on a patient at some point. And so there's lots of challenges. Students crave feedback. We know across the world that that's something that we do really badly, and that the University of Sydney is certainly no exception to that. So how can we improve feedback? And I did like at the end of the last talk where Dina was talking about the importance of failure. I think that assessments where students can get feedback and act on that feedback, and that feedback helps them to improve and have high expectations of the students that they will fail. Life's about failure and learning from failures, and feedback is about doing that. So those are some of the challenges that we face.
Yeah, that's so important, isn't it? That the personalization, I guess, of that feedback that's specific to the individual's requirements. Nimesh, from a technology perspective, how do you feel that technology enables or supports some of the challenges that Adam had highlighted?
Margot, see, every challenge we believe is a source for opportunity. I mean, the moment we have something which is actually bottling us up, we realize there is tremendous potential where we can explore the entire opportunity we have and turn it into an advantage, a technological advantage which will serve mankind. I mean, with about trillions and trillions of brain cells that we have, eventually technology will be only an assistance to mankind. It's a very strong a misbelief that technology might overcome someday, but then we will be the masters for the entire technology. Absolutely, I agree with Aram. The challenges are in terms of security. So how do we make sure that the entire platform is safe, it is secure? There is no data pilferage. And I reckon with different continents and with different countries having their own standards in terms of maintaining security. I mean, if I look at Australia, there is an Australia 1988 Privacy Act. And when you come to Europe, there is a GDPR protocol. Then there are ISO certifications. So there are a whole bunch of security issues which need to be addressed, which needs to be incorporated. That gives us the opportunity to offer a wholesome, holistic solution where we can come down to our clients and tell them, see, guys, this is what we are able to offer you in terms of security, in terms of your data, in terms of data privacy. I'll just give you one small quote. A couple of months back, we had one client who said, all is fine, but I still do not want to share my students' details. Well, we said, well, that's quite a challenge we have. But after a few deliberations, we just gave him a solution. Okay, what you do is you give me a 10-digit code allocated to every of a student. I do not need the entire details or nuances of that particular person, and we'll be able to execute a test. And that's exactly what we did. So the second challenge, which I believe is the scalability issue. If you're talking about a couple of hundred, I guess that's manageable. 1,000, that's a little difficult. But when you come to about hundreds and thousands of students being conducted at the same time and having that scalability, this February, March 2021, we came across a challenge where we were supposed to address assessment to 1 million students in a span of 8 days. So that was like conducting 150,000 examinations every day, seamlessly, flawlessly. And that actually gave us shivers. But by the time we sailed through that process, we realized we can do it because we've done it. It's just a matter of scalability. So that's exactly what we did. And the third challenge is about customization in terms of how do you support what exactly is the requirement. And today, I think, as I said, by 2018-19, we realized we've achieved everything. But today, we realized we've just started to walk. There's a long way that we need to go and achieve in terms of the solutions that we offer to our clients across the globe.
Yes, I don't think we have real understanding of the sheer scope of the numbers that you're dealing with in India, and with the kind of high stakes exams that you would be conducting as well. That security is just simply it's everything.
It's actually of paramount importance. I mean, today that's the first crux that we talk about.
Absolutely. Can we talk about a little bit how things are shifting? Because there is a new normal out there. There is a recognition that authentic assessment, personalization in the assessment and the feedback Adam, how do you feel that that assessment strategies are changing? And there's a kind of a two-part to this too. What will it take from a professional development perspective to enable that to happen as well? Because we know that there has to be a shift and lift with, the academics themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. So I think, as I said earlier, the fact that you can't just assess knowledge, or it's very hard to assess knowledge, and why would you in the online environment, means that we do have to shift our assessments. And clearly employers are telling us that they want students to have certain skills, and those skills aren't all about writing an academic essay or learning the elements of the periodic table. They're much richer skills. They're much more about their thinking and their understanding, rather than just their ability to memorize. And so that is a real shift. We also need students, of course, who are able to work in a multimedia, and so multimodal assessments, which of course is so much better suited to the online environment than it is to an examination hall. It's something that the online environment really provides in much richer ways than we had before. So taking hold of that and bringing those two things together to make assessments that are authentic. But to come back to your point at the end there, absolutely, that it's a real struggle, because people, my academics, and one of my roles is to improve the teaching of the academics, are absolutely success stories of assessment systems where memorization and cramming were the main things. So getting them the mind shift to think that they should assess in the different ways, and then to give them the skills to do that is a real challenge, and something that I spend many hours every week on. And although we're getting somewhere quite slowly, because of the sheer volume of change. To go back to that word again, the sheer volume of change and work that's required at the moment. It is something that's pretty difficult to fit into everybody's working day, but it is something that has to be done if we're going to make this next jump away from sort of emergency online assessment to something.
Yeah. Absolutely. It strikes me, and if I'm just going to pick up on one of the things that you said earlier around, I guess, assessing non-domain specific skills. I'm from where I sit and the work that we do at EduLex, it's really around discovering and surfacing, the workplace skills. From your perspective, I think during the pandemic, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was, and it was achieved, the move to online and an assessment of those domain-specific skills. But how are you going to tackle, these employability skills, these soft skills, these transferable skills? How are you going to tackle assessing those? And is there a way to tackle it at scale? I'd love your thoughts, and Nimish, I'll get yours next.
Yeah, and I think it is possible. I think the scale is a problem, as I said. Also, the background and the skills of the academics is a problem. Just looking at one of the questions in the chat is academics aren't great at giving feedback.
Yeah.
Don't want to spend too much time giving feedback, and they consider the feedback that they give to be good enough, whereas a lot of students want something much richer. And so it is possible. I think we just need to place ourselves as ever in the students' shoes, think about the journey that they're going on, the challenges that they face, and the kind of skills that the employers will want, and then shift our assessments to do that. And it might be portfolios, it might be micro credentials, it might be small skills that they pick up along the way to personalize that journey for them, but also making sure that those assessments are authentic to where they're going, to the profession that they're being trained for.
Nimish, what's your thoughts on that? And that assessing domain-specific skills and also assessing those employability skills. What's your thoughts on that, particularly with reference to the Indian environment?
Margot, just adding on to what Adam said and probably pinpointing the two main challenges that every faculty member faces, because I've witnessed my mother being as a teacher. See, every faculty member has about 300, 400 students to cater to. And presuming that it takes about 10 days, 15 days to complete one chapter, the biggest challenge is that how do you judiciously actually assess every student in terms of their learning and in terms of their outcome of the deliverables. So the only chalk and talk way was that you make them undergo a paper and pen examination mode. You assess every copy. That means if there are 300 students, you are looking at about 3,000 man hours being spent into assessing those 300 students, which is about roughly, I think, 45, 50 hours of human labor going into it. So that was one challenge. So the second challenge is that how do you actually come to the point where you judiciously realize that this particular student or this group of students did not understand topic A or topic B or topic C of a particular chapter? Because I know what you've learned, but then how do you compute the fact that, okay, out of the 7 topics that are there in a particular chapter, these 2 topics were not understood or learned by this segment. So these are the 2 main challenges. Now, as far as coming as to the soft skills are concerned, I think we have one product which is kind of based on John Holland's psychometric assessment, which is the Barrow test. So there will have to be innovation. There will have to be new emergences of the techniques that you would involve. It could be technologically aided. It could be psychometric based. It could be personality based. So there will have to be ways which will have to be evolved, which will have to be matured enough to make sure that we are able to deliver and we are able to offer a wholesome solution where these things can be taken into account. Just last Friday, we were actually deliberating, and our CEO kind of launched a couple of initiatives. And the first one of the first new product feature we launched is called as a watermark. Now, see, the challenge is that how do you ensure that the examination paper, which especially in case of high-stake examinations, how do you ensure that that is not leaked or that is not passed on to a particular process? So what we've innovated now is we've called something as a watermark. So the moment I pass on this question paper to somebody else, the VBox can actually locate and find the path where it was leaked to. So that was another challenge which came to us, that how do you ensure that the examination paper which I'm giving on online does not get leaks and passed on to the other students? So there are challenges, absolutely. And as I said, challenges help you with opportunities, and that's what will have to be taken into account.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And thank you, Nimesh. Adam, we've touched on before this notion around authentic assessment. And we've also been talking a lot about scale in this conversation here. Obviously, things like multiple choice questions are economies of scale. That's the way things have been done and the way that things will probably be part of the assessment arsenal into the future. What are your thoughts around, I guess, authentic assessment? Can multiple choice questions be authentic, or what does it mean to you around what would you define as authentic assessment?
I think authentic assessment is about problem solving that's authentic to means something in that discipline area. Do I believe in multiple choice questions? I find myself not doing as much anymore as I used to. It's really difficult. I think it's actually more time consuming to write good MCQ questions. Although you save time on the marking, you have to refresh them because you have to assume that they're out there, I think. And so writing a good exam, getting a good MCQ is certainly possible, but it's very challenging, and I think in most cases it's actually easier perhaps to write a scenario that requires maybe a few multiple choice questions and a short answer, just to justify the approach that the student's doing. So MCQs are wonderful for formative purposes. They're wonderful for giving rich feedback to the student and giving rich feedback to the teacher. But for summative assessments, I find them harder to justify, and so and I think the workload that they used to save is not so. Maybe not is not the key thing it used to be. Authentic assessment is. We don't tend to in our lives have MCQs. We tend to have things which are much more nuanced. We don't have the right answer in front of us to choose from. Sometimes we have to work it out without the answer. It's not a who wants to be a millionaire. It's much more about thinking about the answer without being given those clues. Formative, yes. Summative, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how would you do that online? How would you do performance-based assessments online?
I think the scale is obviously the difficult thing. I think that I don't necessarily believe that the traditional exam is the way that we should sit. I think we've got to have these assessments which are staged, which have multiple points for feedback, multiple points for the students to build on their understanding. And I think that also helps to build integrity into the assessments, because it's much easier to see that you're dealing with the same student consistently. But doing it at scale is definitely a problem. Maybe some combination of online assessment with oral exams, for example, is important. But that again comes down to scale is always a difficult thing.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah.
Marco, just to cut you short, my apologies. Authentication, what Adam said is also right, but then there are another two components to it. The first component is how do you authenticate the person who's coming to appear for an examination? That's one other challenge. So I might be a bona fide student, but how do I ensure that it's me who's actually coming on the platform to appear? And third rather would be that how do you authenticate the entire flow and process during which the examination has been taken into process. So these are another two challenges. These are another two process of authentication that need to be derived. Over to you, please.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, thank you for that. We need to wrap up, so I would really love it if you could give the 3 key takeaways, I think, in terms of either assessments in a digital environment or where you would like to see assessments in a digital environment go. Nimish, if you can quickly tell us.
Margot, see, again, as I said, the first part is the security and the scalability. That's something which is uncompromisable. That is something which is of paramount importance. With the paradigm shift that we've seen, I think there's still a lot of long way and a lot of innovation that needs to be incorporated in terms of technology and in terms of what solutions we bring on the platform. That there still are, I think, a few parameters which need to be addressed in terms of security, in terms of a cheat-proof examination being conducted, in terms of the associations that you form within the peer-peer groups, which definitely is missing from the conventional classroom. And the third challenge and the third takeaway is that how do we ensure that we have a very strong customizable solution, because every person, every client would have a different need. And so our challenges are to what extent can we help customize the solution that we require and probably help you with those solutions. That's our key mottos, and that's the key parameters that we have.
Thanks, Nimish. Appreciate that. Adam, your 3 key takeaways around assessment.
Thanks, Marco. So I think, first of all, don't try to replicate what worked in the face-to-face environment. Use the, for formative and summative purposes, use the best things that the online environment can give you. Secondly, that means use it as an opportunity for richer, for multimedia, multimodal assessment and more authentic assessment too. And thirdly, I think we haven't really touched on students' concerns around privacy, but try to explain, you have to explain to students the benefits and the flexibility, getting them through their degrees in a pandemic, but also the flexibility and the richness of the assessment. And I think then everybody's responsibility, the students and the staff's responsibility, and integrity being as beneficial for the students as it is for the staff, and that's why it's important.
Oh, and look at that. Here's David.
Look at that.
Look at that, right on time as well. So Adam, Nimish, Margot, thank you so very much for giving us some insights into assessment in the digital world. And there's no doubt that this hybrid and online education environment is not going away anytime soon. So it's exciting to hear that we've got some people thinking deeply about what the future looks like. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Pleasure.
And I should thank all of our speakers today who have given us great insights into their thinking about the connection between India and Australia across 2 incredibly important domains: student engagement and then student assessment, because I think the 2 are incredibly deeply connected. So I don't think you can have one without the other if you want to have true authentic assessment, as our last group talked about. So I'd like to also thank all of our speakers: Aditya, Gupta, Dino Willocks, Raju Ganeth, Cherie Diaz, Margot Griffith, Nimish Chaudhry, and Adam Bridgman. It's been our pleasure to partner with Karen Barker and the Australia India Institute on this program. We've found it enjoyable. I'd like to especially thank the Department of Education, Skills and Employment for their support, and Mel for her words in opening our program earlier today. And finally, to the hundreds of people across India and Australia who have logged in and communicated. We couldn't get to all of your questions that were coming in on the Slido platform, but thank you so very much. If you, you can also, we'll be able to watch this on both the EduGrowth website and our YouTube channel. So at that point, I'd like to say thank you very much for being here this afternoon, and we'll see you soon at another EduGrowth event.